Alright, here's one of those essential questions that will keep you up at night. If four-armed people were real, what weapons would they use? You know, like the Shokan from Mortal Kombat. If you had an extra pair of arms, what would you use them for? Not the sexual stuff. Fighting. Quadruple wielding, obviously, right? Well, not so fast. Let's consider some options. So back in, I don't know, it's probably over 10 years ago by now, when I did pen and paper role play every now and then, mainly GURPS, I actually came up with a four-armed character. Here's one of the first drawings. Again, this is a pretty old one, so bear with me. Shields, of course, are generally a good idea, and I gave him a shield too. Not very well drawn. The perspective is off and the way he holds it, but whatever. But, so if I had another extra two arms, and I'm holding a shield in the upper hand, there's a bit of a problem with that. You can probably see that. I can't do a whole lot with the weapon in the lower arm. I mean, in order to really use it, I have to raise up the shield quite a bit. Now, in some situations that can come in handy, like if I'm defending against a high cut to my face, and while I'm defending, I strike to their legs, that's plausible. But in a lot of situations, this is going to be a little bit in the way. If I have the shield in my lower arm, now I have more options here. Now the important thing would be to not just do this, because if I move my arm in front of the shield, this is going to get cut off. In the same way as if I had it in the other hand, you know, just throwing the arm in front of the shield, now the shield is not actually doing what I needed to do. I have such dainty fingernails on my lower arms. Instead of doing this, I could simply throw a cut in such a way that the blade is in front of the shield and my hand is still mostly behind it, or entirely behind it. I could thrust above the shield while still using it. So this would actually be more useful, I think. Plus, you could defend the lower opening, so your legs or your crotch, with the shield while still fighting normally with the upper arms. I'm not going to talk too much about dual wielding because that's been covered in other videos, but just to sum up, generally it's more common for either two relatively short weapons or a longer and a short weapon to be used together, like a rapier and dagger, or side sword and dagger, or two sticks, or two blades that are maybe 3/4 the length of this messer here. So if I were to try to use both of these, I can, of course, and it was sometimes done. Sometimes we see that in the manuals where, in fact, dual swords are shown, two full-size swords. That's very rare, though. This is a lot harder to deal with, just because of the length. Throughout the entire length of the blade, they can collide. They can intersect at any point along the blade length. So it restricts you more as to how you can throw cuts. For example, if you want to cut from the right side, for example, you would have to, if you want to cut at the same time, you would have to cut the same angle, just with them a little further apart. If you wanted to cut a diagonal and a horizontal, they will collide. You can't cut to the upper and lower opening at the same time because, again, they will collide. You can absolutely do one after the other. So throw the first cut to provoke the opponent to defend, and as soon as they do, you cut with the other blade to a different opening. You can throw a cut and then immediately follow through with a thrust. The more you have, of course, if you have 4 full-size blades, they will get entangled very easily, and it's going to be difficult to coordinate everything. A combination like this would be easier to use effectively, where you have a longer and a shorter blade. Even more versatile would be 2 short weapons, like 2 sickles or daggers, tomahawks, things like that. Something that's short enough that you don't collide with the two easily, and you can move them somewhat independently. So in this case, you can actually throw this sort of cross cut, and you have a lot more room to actually maneuver and do all the things you have to do, right? So this would be excellent, and I could imagine 4 small weapons being dual wielded. Now, the drawback of that is, of course, reach. You don't have much. Something like this has very poor reach compared to an arming sword or even a long sword. So you would have to somehow be able to get in there and do what you have to do. Or perhaps a short weapon and a longer thrusting weapon that can be adjusted. Like if you have a relatively short spear, you can adjust it quite a lot. If you want the reach, you thrust this way. If they're moving in, you can bring it up very short and stab this way. So I think a spear would be pretty effective in this kind of scenario, especially since with thrusts you have a lot more options. In fact, if you wanted to go completely crazy with 4 arms, you could technically use 4 spears and just thrust at 4 different spots, which would be a lot more manageable than cuts. Or you could have a buckler or a shield on one side plus a spear as well. So in that case, you could cover yourself with a buckler or small shield and then thrust at the same time with a spear. This might even work with a relatively large shield, or at least moderately sized shield. In fact, if I had a lower arm to hold the shield here, I could still thrust over top of the shield with the spear without moving my hand too far in front of the shield. What about doubling down on both offense and defense in a different way, though? Imagine you take a two-handed sword and actually grip it with the 2 arms on one side, on the same side. So my bottom arm would grip it down here, the top arm there, and at the same time I'm using 2 arms to support a large shield. So a different type than this, I would imagine a very long strapped shield, so something like a kite shield perhaps, with dual arm straps. So you're actually supporting the weight of the shield with 2 arms, and this would make it very, very difficult, well, basically impossible for a person with 2 arms to really manipulate your shield. If you're holding onto your shield with both arms, there's no way that they can just wrench it around with 1 arm, and this would be extremely solid defense, of course. And at the same time, this would be like a single-handed sword, but with the additional power and control of a two-handed sword. You have much more control over the edge alignment, precision is better, you can obviously strike harder, and all of that. So you basically combine the advantages of a two-handed weapon with the advantages of a shield. Not entirely, because of course the dynamics of using 2 arms on one side as opposed to 1 arm on either side are a little bit different, but this would still be quite good. You could still throw a lot of the traditional cuts from the historical manuals with 2 arms on one side, I think. A thwarting cut with a longsword, for example, is executed by bringing the arm pretty far across. So I'm not sure if you could do that the exact same way if the arm was attached on this side, but you could probably do it at the very least with less follow through, or just by rotating the hips more. So I think this could probably be pulled off in at least a similar way. So I think if I had 4 arms, that would probably be what I would do. A two-handed sword on one side with both of those arms on there, and either 1 large shield supported with both arms on the left, or 2 bucklers perhaps, because the nice thing about this is that you can defend 2 openings at the same time. One thing the opponent can do, for example, is throw a cut at your head, and as soon as they see that you're defending that, they drop down and cut the leg instead. That wouldn't work if you have a buckler in the upper and the lower opening, because you could adjust pretty easily. Now, to be fair, against leg cuts, the better defense is to simply move the leg out of the way and step back. But it would just give you a lot more options. So you would have plenty of ways to defend one side, and you would still have pretty solid defense on the other side because of the versatility of using two hands for extra control on the sword. Admittedly, it's not as cool and stylish as quadruple wielding though. I mean, if you're gonna make a character with 4 arms to begin with, you want them to use 4 weapons, right? It's just kind of how it goes. I went for that too. I mean, this is a later drawing that I did of the same character, and at that point I thought about it and I was like, wait a moment, the longer weapons that I drew before, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So instead I figured, okay, why not use a buckler and some kind of fist weapon like claws or a katar or a pata. Something like that would be very useful, I think. In fact, quadruple wielding for patas would be quite good. Patas or katars or just shorter dagger-like blades with heavy gauntlets perhaps and heavy armor on the arms to protect them. Then you would have a lot of options to move in, and as you move in and deal with the superior reach of the opponent, you would be able to deflect their cuts with 1 or even 2 arms, which is another big advantage, of course, that a fighter with 4 arms would have. They could use 2 arms against the opponent's 1, and this is very noticeable if you fight with a single-handed sword against somebody with a two-handed sword, like a long sword. If you have a sword and buckler, it's not that big of a deal because you do have the support from the other hand. You can use them together. But if you just have a single-handed sword and spar with somebody with a long sword, this is very, very difficult, because unless you're substantially physically stronger than your opponent, you can't guarantee that you will be able to stop that cut with one hand. If they cut at you with 2 hands and you try to statically block it with 1, it'll probably just blow through and hit you anyway. So this is something that 4 arms would of course help with. You could actually parry or block with both arms and just have the strength advantage. Anyway, so I'm sure you could debate this to death and talk a whole lot more about different tactics and types of armor and weapon types and throwing weapons and then, you know, whatever, crossbows, all the kinds of different ideas. And feel free to share your ideas down below. Anyway, I hope you found the video entertaining. Thanks for watching and have a good one, folks. If you haven't seen it before, I've got an Amazon store where I list certain things that I personally recommend, like swords, knives, video and audio gear, tools, etc. And I'll keep adding new stuff in comments. The link is down below.